Stop the insanity. Get focused on what really matters in life. Your faith, your family, your finances, and your future. Now sit back and change the trajectory of your life. This is Money for Life, brought to you by the 100-Year Savings Solution. Are you concerned about the markets? Stop taking unnecessary risks with your money while also getting great benefits. Visit us at 100yearsavings.com. Now, let's welcome your Money for Life hosts, Teresa Kuhn and Rick Sapio.
Hello, everybody. This is Teresa Kuhn with Money for Life, and I have a very special guest with us today. And those of you who've been following us for a while know how much I absolutely adore my son and how he was raised quite differently. And we've made some different choices with him that actually today may not be so different, but back when we were raising him when he was born and his first 18 years of life, the decisions we made and some of the parenting things we did were a little bit different. So we're going to have a series of conversations because Keating, and that's his name, Keating Kuhn, is now a business owner, entrepreneur, and he's got, I think, some perspectives that you might find very, very interesting. And for those who are still raising kids or have an influence over your kids and the raising of your grandchildren, I think you're going to find these conversations fascinating. At least I know I'm enjoying them so much because it is such a pleasure interviewing my son and having these conversations. So Keating, welcome to Money for Life.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, well, let's get started. I think where we should start is, how do you think you were raised different from your peers, your friends, your acquaintances, from your schoolmates? What would you say 3 things that were just really, really different that you noticed growing up?
Firstly, I would say just the conversations that I was a part of as a young person, being an only child, probably helped some of that, and going and meeting the people that you guys were either working with or friends with. I feel like I was within a part of a lot of those conversations, and sometimes I might have talked with y'all, at least to a certain extent, hoping that I could go play and do other things, but I feel like some of those conversations probably rubbed off to a certain extent. The second big one was obviously not going to college and pursuing a different route besides the traditional high school way of right after high school, you graduate and you go to college. The third one being the high school that I graduated from being very different from a normal high school, and the fact that it started at 11 a.m., ended at 4 p.m., and I would go and work at the restaurant for 40 to 50 hours during that week, whether it was Saturday and Sunday or Monday through Friday, just giving less homework from a normal school, less extracurricular activities, and basically just focusing on work, which I enjoyed thoroughly.
Well, let's discuss your high school real quick, since you just brought that up. We made a decision. We were looking for a high school that wasn't so focused on having you spend 6-8 hours a day doing homework, and that had more of an independent schedule where you were responsible for work assignments, but then you weren't necessarily working into the wee hours of the morning doing homework and different assignments. You chose not to participate in sports, and we said to you, hey, if you're not doing sports, you've got to get a job. And that was a bit different for you than the rest of your peers. You liked to work, but at first, did you find like you were disadvantaged or we were mean to you, making you work, or?
I wouldn't say that. There was a certain amount of things that I would ask for or wanted to spend money on. And to a certain extent, I think that was at least registered in my mind that I started having to pay for some of those things, or I couldn't have things. So I didn't see myself as disadvantaged. I think it came roughly around the same time period when I had switched schools to when I had started working. So it played well with each other. In the fact that, I did realize, hey, I have so much extra time at the end of the day because the school was different than most high schools. And so maybe for the first couple months, it seemed weird, but after a little while, it just became a habit. I still had most of my weekends to do the things that I wanted. I know Sunday mornings were the biggest pain is staying up late on Saturdays and still going to work the next morning. But having school that starts at 11 a.m. anyway, you get to sleep in for the most part. You end school at 4 o'clock. Your first shift starts at 4:30. You end at 12:31 a.m. And then you go home and you get to wake up late. So I felt like it went very well. And I enjoyed the 3 years that I spent working tremendously.
And I can tell you as a mom on a Friday night, knowing that you were working and not out and about was a big relief to me. And unfortunately, I didn't fall asleep until you actually came home and were home for the night. And that was one of the disadvantages to you working at a 24-hour diner. And for those of you who aren't from Austin, Texas, the diner is Kirby Lane, which is an Austin institution. It's a very well-known diner. They've got multiple locations and it's been around Austin for 40, 50 years, right? It's been here for a long, long time. This is a message from our sponsor, the 100-Year Savings Solution. Rick and I do these podcasts because we want to impact people's lives in 4 areas: their faith, their family, their finances, and their future. And with the 100-Year Savings Solution, it gives you more options to live a better life in those 4 areas. It is a specially designed whole life insurance policy that gives you more for your money than you'll ever get from a bank, a CD, or the traditional savings solution. Go to 100yearsavings.com to learn more. What would you say you learned from working in high school? And you actually had a business, so you had a pet sitting business before that. What did you learn as a young man or a young teenager at that time, having that kind of responsibility?
First of all, learning that people depended on a 16-year-old to be there when they say or they need you to be there. Showing up on time and doing at least 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours of work before you're able to go home for the night. I think most kids find that first experience working after college. When they write their first resume to apply for their first job, there's usually no prior work history. There's basically just references that they put down. There's education that they put down, maybe a certain amount of extracurriculars that would have tied into maybe a work type atmosphere, but usually most people are not putting 3-4 years of work on the resume after college. That was one thing, just developing some sort of habit with working at a young age. I think the biggest thing was, especially working at a restaurant, you see so many different walks of life. You have the kids that were my age, you had the ones that were either in college and working at Kirby just to help pay for rent or help pay for, student loans, things like that. And then you had the 40 and 50-year-olds that had been there either at Kirby for a long time or at 10 different other restaurants, and that's kind of what they had done for their career. I had a lot of great people that I had met that they loved the fact that when they got home at the end of the day, their biggest worry was whether they brought someone a water or not. And that they made enough to pay the bills, they made enough to pay for their hobbies, but they never had to stress about work when they went home at night. They just showed up the next day at the time that they were given and they went home, and that was the end of their responsibilities from work. It definitely opened my eyes, and especially when we had started the business for Gold Eagle, when I would go back and talk to those same people, that was almost one envious thing of seeing these 40 or 50-year-olds that just never had to deal with the stress of owning a business.
That's interesting. You're right. They live a life where when they're done with their shift, that's it. They're done. They don't have to bring their work home with them. I remember dropping you off at work, I think, one time where you were telling me about one of your coworkers who rode a bike to work, and it would be 1 o'clock in the morning and he's riding his bike home. Do you remember that?
I do.
Because he didn't have enough money for a car. And that kind of broke my heart. Like, I don't remember how old he was. I don't remember his circumstances, but here's a guy that was working a shift at the same restaurant as you were and didn't have a car to get to work. And, I put myself as his mother thinking, oh my gosh, if my child was out there at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock at night, riding his bike home from work, like in terms of safety, and it's tough. And, I get on the one hand, you don't have all the stresses that you do as a business owner when you just work as an employee and your shift is done and you're off. But on the other hand, you have such limited options when it comes to living and lifestyle and paying bills. And any conversations you would have with those people about that, or that was their life, that's what they chose and that they were okay with it?
I think it really depended on who it was. I think you're absolutely right. Most of their options given weren't anything that I had experienced. So, and I think I had been at least well-rounded enough to understand that people just have different walks of life. There are, many people that are just more privileged or less privileged than every other human that you see. And it's just about the circumstances given and their outlook that depends on how they're able to do things. I think, the person that doesn't have a bike or that doesn't have a car to drive to work, at least speaking from experience of the Kirby family that we had, I didn't really see any of the trials of their life when they came to work. It was more of a family type atmosphere where they would give us food at the beginning and end of the shifts. They treated the employees very well, where I think most of the background noise that comes from life wasn't brought into work, at least on a normal day-to-day basis.
And I remember you became really close friends with a couple of your managers, and they didn't have the easiest life, but they didn't make the best choices either. And they did talk to you about their experiences, and you'd come home and you'd talk about it with us, and we'd talk like, well, that's the consequence of the choice that you make. There was one manager that had a bunch of kids. I don't remember if he had a couple baby mamas or not, but he was working his butt off as a manager. The managers worked really, really hard, but they were really nice people. They worked their butts off. They treated their employees well. And it was just lessons that you learned young. And I remember talking to you about this, do you see where their life is today? And is that what you want for your life? And you'd look at it and say, probably not, right?
Right.
Probably not. Let's talk about the different experiences you had as an only child and how we exposed you to a bunch of different people. We dragged you, probably is a better word, to some speakers and conferences and learning opportunities, and just being in the room, you were probably absorbing a lot of information. We haven't really talked about this, but did you feel like it was interesting to a certain degree, or you were bored to death, or why am I here? Or you certainly couldn't talk about some of the things that you were learning with your peers because it was totally different.
I'm sure there were some that I was bored at. I mean, I can't remember nearly, not even half of the ones that probably been brought to. But looking back on most of the, one-off courses, if you want to call them, that I've taken, it was a packaged deal of a college experience. Without the parties, without the, large 250-person classes, without the student loan debts and everything like that. If you combined all of the, classes and courses that I had probably been to, it is like a mini college to some extent. And then you combine that with the HVAC school. I mean, there's just pieces and parts, and they weren't math, they weren't science, they weren't history in a classical form, but a lot of the classes touched on, either modern day history or history of the past, different sciences, or math to some extent too, just money making classes and, learning about money in different ways. I can't speak to each individual event, but I think I did enjoy them on a grand scheme.
So, you talk about the first thing, and you are an only child. Well, because you were an only child, you didn't have a playmate all the time. And so you were involved in our adult conversations. And from the day you were born, we took you everywhere. We never left you home. And every trip we had, every vacation, not every conference that I went to or every business thing I went to, but you certainly had a different experience as an only child than a child that was raised with other siblings. And I think that's one thing with only children. There's that concern about raising a really spoiled child, right, who gets everything. And there's also the concern of raising a child doesn't have the same opportunities for fun and playing as you would have if you had siblings. But you did have a lot of friends that would come over, and you had a lot of play dates. And I mean, it wasn't the worst childhood, I'm sure, in the history of childhoods, right?
Right.
It was a decent childhood, I would say. I hope so, anyways.
You have just experienced the Money for Life podcast, brought to you by the 100-Year Savings Solution. Implement these strategies today and create a life by design. For more information, visit 100yearsavings.com. Have a blessed day.